The levies on China are being increased by an additional 34 points to 54%. Japan and South Korea will be tariffed at 24 and 26% respectively. India is one of the U.S.'s top trading partners and faces a 26% tariff. Let's talk about that. Jayati Ghosh is an economist and professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. You're joining us from New Delhi. Thanks for your time. You've told our team that, in your view, there's no logic to these tariffs. Why?
Well, they claim that these are reciprocal and that they're responding to the tariffs imposed by that country. But in fact, if you look at it, the only way you could make any economic sense of it, the formula they've used is the bilateral trade deficit of that country divided by imports multiplied by half. And so that's completely random and arbitrary. It is not to do with the tariffs that that country imposes at all. And it makes no economic sense. So yes, India is going to face 26% more plus 10% that was already imposed, so 36% actually. China, as you mentioned, 36 plus 20, so 56. But some of the poorest and crisis-ridden countries in the world, Bangladesh, is going to face very high tariffs of 37%.
What does that do? What do high tariffs do to smaller, weaker economies?
Well, basically, insofar as that country is export dependent, it damages exports, employment, investment, economic activity in general. And we are talking about a situation where many of these countries in South Asia, India, of course, but Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, are very dependent on exports, not just for their own growth, but for crucial foreign exchange that they need for their imports and for the minimum kinds of things they need for their people to survive.
So Donald Trump says that there are essentially two ways this can go for countries that want to avoid an escalating trade war, right? Where they increase tariffs, Trump increased tariffs, and they both keep increasing tariffs. If countries want to avoid that and want to get rid of the tariffs that Trump announced yesterday, there are two ways he says this can go. Either countries should relocate their manufacturing in their factories to the United States, or they should remove what he sees as trade barriers to U.S. goods going into their country. Do you see India doing either of those?
Unfortunately, India has already succumbed. It's already promised, and we're told, we don't know the details, we're told that India has already promised a range of reductions in duties of US exports. We've already, in a sense, the deal to get Starlink into the country, which was opposed by the major telecom providers, and which will have major security implications for India, has already been accepted. So India is already succumbing. It's very unfortunate because, if you don't stand up to a bully, then they tend to walk all over you much more.
Now, there is a personal, I don't know if it's a friendship, but at least a good rapport between Donald Trump and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But what came out of yesterday's announcement from Trump is that it's not about friendship, right? He said, we have friends and foes, and often our friends, trade-wise, treat us worse than our foes. So this good rapport between Trump and Modi didn't change anything to the U.S.'s trade policy.
Yes, in India, there's a lot made of this good rapport between Trump and Modi. But, Modi has been given short shrift by President Trump, certainly in this round, the second round, and even in terms of, not even being received by him at the door of the White House when he came, etc. And as I said, if you don't stand up to a bully, then they think they can treat you like dirt. And that's already happening.
What's the biggest weapon, or maybe let's call it a tool, in India's toolbox to handle this?
I think the biggest weapon in practically every country's toolbox is the search for alternatives. The US is really around 15% of the exports of emerging market and developing economies. So it's not that much. In India's case, it's about 17%. Again, not that much. We should be looking for alternative markets. We should be looking for alternative sources of supply. And it's only if enough countries do that the US administration will also see sense and realize that this is counterproductive for everyone.
So, this is so interesting because Donald Trump's whole gamble is that because the US is the world's largest economy, it's a massive market, 320 million people who are, relative to the rest of the world, wealthy and buy a lot, consume a lot, he's gambling that countries will not divest from the U.S. economy and will actually, kind of have to pay the price.
Yeah, I think, it's a very risky gamble because the US is already significantly smaller in terms of global output and in terms of global trade than it was even 10, 15 years ago. It has actually shrunk. It was 30%, it went to 15%, and it's really now in a position where it's going to get less and less. many more alternatives in terms of diversified production. So it's not going to be so easy for the US to just insist on its dominance.
Okay, fascinating one to follow. Jayati Ghosh, economist and professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Thank you for joining us.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.